The sun dipped low over the sprawling expanse of asphalt and dust, casting long shadows across the quiet highway. The distant hum of an engine broke the silence, a lone rider approaching like a shadow on the horizon. His motorcycle gleamed under the fading sunlight, a black and chrome machine that seemed to hum with purpose. The rider's leather jacket bore no patches, no colors, just the unmistakable weight of someone who carried his world on his back. Jeremiah Brooks was no stranger to the road. Born and raised in a small southern town, he learned early on that life didn't hand out kindness easily, especially for someone who looked like him. But the open road, that was different. It didn't care who you were. It only demanded respect and the willingness to ride. Jeremiah was on his way to a rally, an annual gathering of riders from all walks of life. He wasn't going to join a club or prove anything. He was going to find freedom in the roar of engines and the shared bond of the ride. Yet, as the miles passed beneath his tires, a growing unease settled in his gut, an instinct honed by years of navigating both literal and metaphorical potholes. Something about this ride felt different. He rolled into the town of Pine Ridge just as the neon signs outside its lone diner flickered to life. The town itself was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Jeremiah parked his bike and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. The diner fell silent. Conversations halted, forks clattered against plates, and every pair of eyes turned to him. He nodded politely, ignoring the weight of their stares, and made his way to the counter. "Coffee, please," he said, his voice steady but not without warmth. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, poured him a cup. "You headed to the rally?" she asked, her voice just loud enough to cut through the tension in the room. Jeremiah nodded. "Figured I'd check it out." Before the waitress could respond, the door swung open, and a group of men strode in. Their jackets bore the emblem of the Iron Fangs, a local biker club notorious for their aggressive presence and their unspoken but well-known code. Outsiders weren't welcome, especially not ones like Jeremiah. The leader, a towering figure with a salt and pepper beard and a cold stare, stopped just short of Jeremiah's seat. His name was Hank Grizzly Thornton, a man who commanded both fear and loyalty among his crew. He eyed Jeremiah's unmarked jacket and then looked him square in the eye. "You lost, friend?" Grizzly's tone was laced with mockery, his grin predatory. Jeremiah didn't flinch, just passing through. The room seemed to hold its breath. Grizzly leaned in, his voice dropping low enough that only Jeremiah could hear. "We don't take kindly to strangers here, especially those who think they can just roll in like they own the place." Jeremiah met his gaze, unyielding. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Good," Grizzly replied, straightening up. "Because if you find it, you might not like how it ends." The Iron Fangs laughed as they took a table in the corner, their voices loud and their presence oppressive. Jeremiah sipped his coffee, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't over. Outside, the hum of motorcycles grew louder, a sign that more riders were arriving for the rally. Jeremiah paid for his coffee and stepped outside, the air heavy with tension. As he mounted his bike, he noticed the Iron Fangs watching him through the diner's window, their faces a mix of amusement and challenge. He knew he had a choice. Turn back, avoid the rally, and let the Iron Fangs have their way, or ride on and face whatever lay ahead. The open road stretched before him, an uncertain horizon calling his name. Jeremiah revved his engine, the sound echoing through the small town. He wasn't just riding for himself anymore. This was about something bigger, something worth fighting for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of twilight, Jeremiah rode on, the distant glow of the rally just visible on the horizon. Behind him, the Iron Fangs mounted their bikes, their laughter carried on the wind like a storm brewing in the distance. The road ahead was long, and the journey far from over. But Jeremiah knew one thing for certain. He wasn't backing down. Jeremiah's bike roared down the darkened highway, its headlights slicing through the night like a blade. The cool wind tugged at his jacket, carrying with it the faint echoes of distant engines. He glanced in his side mirror and saw them, a line of motorcycles following him, their headlights glowing like predatory eyes. The Iron Fangs weren't just watching. They were closing in. He tightened his grip on the handlebars and leaned into the throttle, the engine responding with a surge of power. The rally was still miles away, but the tension in his chest made each passing second feel like an eternity. He wasn't scared. He'd faced worse. But he knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about proving that the open road belonged to everyone. As the faint glow of a gas station came into view, Jeremiah made a quick decision to stop. He needed to refuel, but more importantly, he needed to get a sense of what the Iron Fangs were planning. He pulled into the lot, the fluorescent lights humming softly above him. The attendant, a young man with shaggy hair and a hesitant smile, stepped out of the small booth. "Evening," he said, eyeing Jeremiah's bike. "Nice ride." "Thanks," Jeremiah replied, keeping his tone casual. He began to fill up his tank, all the while glancing toward the road. The rumble of the Iron Fangs bikes grew louder until they pulled into the lot, their presence overwhelming the quiet space. Grizzly dismounted first, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. The rest of the crew followed, their movements deliberate and intimidating. "Looks like we're headed the same way," Grizzly said, his tone dripping with mock friendliness. "Looks like it," Jeremiah replied evenly, capping his tank. Grizzly took a step closer, his smile fading. "You don't get it, do you? That rally? That's our territory. We don't need someone like you showing up and making waves." Jeremiah met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "The road doesn't belong to anyone, least of all to you." A tense silence hung in the air. The young attendant froze, his eyes darting between Jeremiah and the Iron Fangs. The crew exchanged glances, their smirks faltering as they realized Jeremiah wasn't backing down. Grizzly leaned in, his voice low. "You're either real brave or real stupid. Either way, you're gonna learn." Without another word, the Iron Fangs mounted their bikes and roared off into the night, their engines loud and defiant. Jeremiah exhaled, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew this was far from over. Back on the highway, the miles seemed longer than before. Memories of his past crept into his mind. His father teaching him how to ride. His mother's warnings about standing tall in a world that would try to push him down. He thought about the friends he'd lost and the battles he'd fought, both on and off the road. This wasn't just another ride, it was a fight for something bigger. When he finally reached the rally, the sight was breathtaking. Hundreds of motorcycles lined the massive open field, their chrome gleaming under strings of lights. Riders from every background were there, sharing stories, laughter, and the unspoken bond that came with the open road. Jeremiah parked his bike and stepped into the crowd. For a moment, he felt the tension ease. This was what riding was about: freedom, camaraderie, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to be caged. But that peace was short-lived. The Iron Fangs arrived like a storm, their bikes roaring as they entered the rally. Conversations died, and the air grew thick with unease. Grizzly and his crew dismounted, their presence a challenge to anyone who dared to cross them. Jeremiah stood his ground, watching as Grizzly scanned the crowd before locking eyes with him. The unspoken message was clear: this wasn't over. Throughout the night, the tension between the Iron Fangs and the other riders grew. Subtle provocations turned into heated arguments, and Jeremiah found himself caught in the middle. He didn't want to start a fight, but he couldn't ignore the way Grizzly and his crew treated everyone like they owned the place. As the hours passed, whispers spread through the rally. Stories of the Iron Fangs' intimidation tactics, their control over local events, and their unrelenting hostility toward anyone they saw as different. Jeremiah listened carefully, piecing together a picture of a club that thrived on fear and division. By the time the moon hung high in the sky, the rally had become a powder keg. Riders who had come for a weekend of freedom and fun now found themselves on edge, unsure of what would happen next. Jeremiah knew he couldn't stay silent. If he backed down, it wouldn't just be him the Iron Fangs targeted. It would be anyone who dared to challenge their dominance. As he stood in the middle of the field, surrounded by the hum of engines and the murmurs of the crowd, he made a decision. Tomorrow, when the rally's main event, a cross-country ride, began, he would do more than participate. He would lead. He knew the risks. He knew the Iron Fangs would come after him, that they would stop at nothing to protect their so-called territory. But he also knew this was his moment to show everyone what it meant to ride with courage, to stand for something bigger than fear. Jeremiah looked out at the sea of bikes and riders, his resolve unshaken. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't riding alone anymore. The morning sun rose over the rally grounds, casting a golden glow across the sea of bikes. The air buzzed with excitement and tension as riders prepared for the cross-country ride. Jeremiah stood near his bike, adjusting his gloves, his thoughts calm but focused. Around him, the other riders whispered in anticipation. They had heard about his quiet defiance of the Iron Fangs, and many looked to him now with a mix of admiration and curiosity. As the start of the ride approached, the Iron Fangs positioned themselves at the front, their stance a clear message that they intended to lead. Grizzly, towering over his crew, wore a smug grin that made it clear he thought he had already won. But Jeremiah wasn't about to let fear decide the outcome. With a deep breath, he walked his bike to the front of the pack, the rumble of his engine cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Grizzly's smile faltered, replaced by a cold glare. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Grizzly said, his voice low and threatening. "I know exactly when to quit," Jeremiah replied, his tone steady. "But this isn't that time." The riders behind them fell silent, the moment thick with unspoken tension. Then one by one, others began to pull their bikes forward, taking their place alongside Jeremiah. They weren't just following him. They were standing with him. Grizzly scowled, but he didn't move. The signal to start the ride echoed through the air, and with a rev of engines, the pack roared to life. Jeremiah took the lead, the wind whipping past him as the endless road stretched ahead. The ride was breathtaking, weaving through rolling hills, small towns, and long stretches of open highway. But Jeremiah couldn't relax. He could feel the Iron Fangs just behind him, their presence a dark cloud on the horizon. As the riders entered a winding mountain pass, Grizzly and his crew made their move. They surged forward, their bikes roaring as they closed in on Jeremiah. The road narrowed, the cliffs on either side steep and unforgiving. Jeremiah's heart pounded as Grizzly pulled alongside him, his intentions clear. "Time to show you how we handle things around here," Grizzly shouted over the roar of their engines. Jeremiah didn't flinch. Instead, he focused on the road, his movements precise and controlled. The other riders watched from behind, their anxiety palpable as the two men pushed their bikes to the limit. In a moment of reckless bravado, Grizzly tried to force Jeremiah off the road, his bike veering dangerously close. But Jeremiah anticipated the move, his quick reflexes keeping him steady. As Grizzly overcorrected, his bike wobbled, and for a split second, his control faltered. Jeremiah seized the opportunity, surging ahead and leaving Grizzly to battle his own recklessness. The Iron Fangs, seeing their leader struggling, hesitated. One by one, they fell back, their confidence shaken. By the time the riders reached the next rest stop, the mood had shifted. The crowd that had once feared the Iron Fangs now looked to Jeremiah with respect and gratitude. He had done more than stand up to them. He had shown everyone that courage and skill could outshine intimidation. Grizzly dismounted his bike, his face red with anger and embarrassment. He walked toward Jeremiah, his fists clenched, but the presence of the crowd stopped him short. The other riders were no longer silent witnesses. They were united. "You got lucky," Grizzly muttered, his voice low enough that only Jeremiah could hear. "No," Jeremiah replied, his voice calm. "I just know what I'm riding for." Grizzly sneered but said nothing more. He turned and walked away, his crew following like shadows. The Iron Fangs' hold on the rally had been broken, their dominance shattered by the quiet strength of one man who refused to back down. As the sun began to set, Jeremiah stood by his bike, watching the horizon. Riders approached him throughout the evening, offering handshakes, words of thanks, and stories of how his stand had inspired them. For Jeremiah, the victory wasn't just about the rally or the Iron Fangs. It was about reclaiming the road for everyone, about proving that freedom didn't come from fear, but from the courage to stand tall, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As the last of the sunlight faded, he climbed back onto his bike, the hum of its engine a familiar comfort. The road stretched ahead, endless and full of possibilities. With a final glance at the rally behind him, Jeremiah rode off into the night, the wind carrying him toward whatever lay ahead. The open road was his, as it was for everyone who dared to ride it. And in the end, that was all that mattered.